Hey guys, Yips here, coming at you with another video, and this one is going to be about Affliction on the PTR. Now, a lot has changed with Affliction on the PTR. I didn't want to make a video earlier because there was so much stuff being swapped around and moved about, and I feel like it's just better to come at you guys with one video covering all of the changes that have happened, because I feel like we're one of the last iterations of Affliction, and I can give you guys a good outlook of how Affliction will perform on the PTR, as well as talk about many of the changes in depth. So, first, what we're going to be going over is the talent changes. Afterwards, we're going to be going over the ability changes that Blizzard has made. And then we'll talk about the viability in Tomb of Sargeras and how to deal damage in different sort of ways. So, let's talk about talents. So, a lot has changed with the talents for Affliction. We have a bunch of changes on the 15 tree, the 60 tree, and the 100 tree. One of the major ones you'll notice is Siphon Life is no longer on the 60 tree, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's talk about what Blizzard has done with the level 15 talents. So across the board, Blizzard has nerfed the level 15 talents. The reason they did this is because Malefic Grasp and Writhe and Agony were too powerful in their own regard, and Haunt was a little bit too weak in comparison. So what they've done is they've kind of reduced them all down to a similar level. Malefic Grasp, while channeling Drain Soul, your damage over time effects increased by 25%. Writhe and Agony now only stacks to 15 instead of 20, and Haunt's cooldown has been reduced by 5 seconds, but the damage amp has changed from 30% to 15%. So the reason that they changed Haunt in this way is because they didn't want it to be so much more powerful than Malefic Grasp. Obviously, Haunt being at 30% made it way more powerful than MG would be, but reducing that damage modifier down to 10% is a lot better. So you can expect to use Haunt on single target movement fights, Writhe and Agony on multi-target, and then Malefic Grasp on standstill turret fights. So quite a nice balance all in all on the level 15 tier. For the level 30 tier, we have Contagion. You deal 15% increased damage compared to the old iteration, which was 18%. So it's been nerfed a little bit. This is just to bring it in line with the other talents. I think they're trying to promote absolute corruption on multi-target fights, and this slight nerf to Contagion will probably do that. So Contagion will be the single target build, AC will be the multi-target build, and we'll have to see where Empowered Life Tap fits in. Nothing changed for the level 45 tier, but the level 60 tier and the level 100 tier are probably the most exciting changes that have happened. So on the level 60 tier, we now have Phantom Singularity. So this used to be the level 100 tier, and I think it being on this tier means we're going to see a lot more usage out of it. So they've reduced the cooldown of this ability from 1 minute to 40 seconds, which is quite nice. They also upped the damage on it, which is also very good. So quite a strong talent altogether. Probably going to be used in a bunch of raid encounters that have some cooldown AoE. So when you're thinking like a boss fight like Gul'dan, when the eyes spawn, you would now have a cooldown like this you could use every single time in order to do some AoE DPS that Affliction lacked before. And they also have slightly changed Soul Harvest. It's a little bit of a buff. The baseline duration of Soul Harvest now lasts 12 seconds, but it's increased by 4 seconds for each target afflicted by your agony, as opposed to 2 seconds. So this just means the more agonies you have out, the greater effect your Soul Harvest will have compared to before. And then finally, the level 100 tree, we have the new talent, Death's Embrace, and we have Siphon Life. So Siphon Life is the exact same as it was before, except it does approximately, I would say, about 30 to 40% more damage than it did before. So quite a nice buff to Siphon Life all in all. It's kind of nice. Now you can take Siphon and Soul Harvest together. Very, very good. And then Death's Embrace. Now, Death's Embrace combat or the text can be quite misleading, but I'll explain to you guys what it means. So, Agony, Corruption, Unstable Affliction, and Drain Soul deal up to 50% increased damage on targets below 35% health. What this means is when the target reaches 35% HP, instead of dealing 50%, you deal 0% increased damage. But as the target gets lower and lower, that damage ramp goes up. So when the target reaches 0%, you're dealing the maximum 50% damage modifier, meaning it's a scaling execute. The lower the boss is, the more damage you'll deal. So it's quite a nice execute, okay? And then Soul Conduit had stayed the same. So that's with regarding the talents. Quite a few changes. I would say it's similar to the Destro talent rework we saw in 7.1.5, but it's quite some nice changes. I think Phantom Singularity and Siphon Life being on different tiers, specifically moving tiers, was a really, really solid change by Blizzard. And I also think the addition of Death's Embrace is excellent. I'll talk about that more in the future. So those are the talent changes. Now, what have we seen with damage abilities? Well, we've seen a flat increase by 20% across the board. Obviously, by changing Malefic Grasp and nerfing Writhe and Agony, nerfing both these talents a lot, Affliction was going to see huge damage depreciations. So what they've done is they've increased the damage of most of our dots by 20%, specifically Corruption, I think Siphon Life as well, Haunt, Drain Soul. A lot of the Affliction abilities have been increased by 20% to make up for this, which is really, really good. So what this means is you're no longer really dependent on Malefic Grasp when you're doing damage, so your damage outside of MG will be a lot higher. What does this mean? This means on a raid encounter, when you're tunneling a boss, you no longer feel like multi-dotting a different target that just spawned is going to be a damage decrease for you. Now, from now on, it should be a damage increase, which is going to be nice. So instead of having to tunnel that Drain Soul uptime, Affliction's going to feel more comfortable to multi-dot because our baseline damage is higher. So they reduced the modifier of MG, but then upped our baseline to make things flow a little bit better. So those are the changes in 7.2.5 that you've seen. Now let's talk about viability for Affliction in the Tomb of Sargeras, okay? So first off, we have our tier set for Tomb of Sargeras, which is quite nice. Corruption is going to generate soul shards now. I think it's been about 1.5 a minute or 2.5 a minute. Either way, it's quite nice. So Corruption is going to be a shard generation talent, and spending a soul shard has a chance, 25% chance, to grant you a certain percentage of haste for 8 seconds. I think it's probably going to be around 10% or 15%. We'll have to see what Blizzard does, but this is also quite nice because we're spending shards all the time, and just getting some free haste for doing that will be excellent. So the set bonus is really, really good for Affliction, which will definitely help our viability in the Tomb of Sargeras. But now let's look at Tomb of Sargeras as a whole. So for bosses in Tomb of Sargeras, if you're wondering if Affliction is going to be viable for progression, the answer is an astounding yes. Affliction will be excellent for progression in Tomb of Sargeras. It's kind of the do-all Warlock spec. It's going to be great at cleaving. It's going to be decent at single target. It's going to have a lot of niche, like it's going to have a very niche spot in raiding for right now, okay? So let's talk about why this is. Affliction has great baseline DPS. Our sustain is very good. You know, when we're attacking a boss or whatever, our baseline of damage is very high, and we never really, you know, lack that sustained single target. With the changes of Phantom Singularity moving into this tree instead of being on the level 100 tree, it gives us some on-demand AoE, which is much better than what it was before. Also, Siphon Life being in the final tier combined with Death's Embrace also improves our viability because it makes us a little bit more versatile on single target. Also, Haunt moving up to the level 15 tier increases Affliction's mobility. So all of these things kind of makes Affliction a lot better than it used to be. And when we look at Death's Embrace, this is truly the powerhouse Affliction talent we've been waiting for. I really want to highlight this, okay? So, in a progression raid encounter, the most important thing is killing the boss in phase 3 for the most part, right? Phase 3 is where a lot of mechanics happen on a lot of very hard boss fights, and when you get into execute phase, it's super important to do a lot of DPS. And that's exactly what Death's Embrace allow you to do. This is the reason why Shadow Priests are so good in progression. This is the reason why so many different classes are just great in progression, is because they have huge execute DPS for pushing hard phases. So when you think about Mythic Gul'dan, when you think about a lot of bosses, the hard part is when they get low. And the fact that Affliction is going to be able to deal up to 50% increased damage when they're low is just going to automatically net us some spots on some boss fights. Boss fights in particular that I can mention right now are going to be the Fallen Avatar. Fallen Avatar is a execute boss. Once he gets low, he becomes infinitely harder and you need to burn him down. There's a lot of bosses like that in this instance, which makes Affliction very powerful just due to this passive execute. Okay, so really look forward to Affliction in Tomb of Sargeras. It's definitely going to be viable. It's going to be the spec I'm playing on most bosses, all right? So Affliction is going to be good, guys. Look forward to it. Okay, so regardless of all that, let's talk about some of the builds we're going to be running, okay? Obviously, we're probably going to be playing Haunt on most single target bosses. I think the build that's going to be most standard is going to be Haunt, Contagion, Soul Harvest, Siphon Life. Overall, some pretty good talents, and I'm going to show you guys how it works, and then we'll, you know, dabble into some other talents. I'll show you guys how to do DPS with those, and you guys can see the numbers here on my SCADA. So let's go. So I'm using the Haste Food and Intellect Flask, and I have equipped the new trinket, the Haste Stacking Trinket. It's basically like a Whispers Trinket, and the legendaries that I'm using are using the helmet and the belt. All right, so let's just see a baseline of DPS. So the way you're going to work it is you're going to get your 3 dots out, okay? You're going to pop your trinket, you're going to cast your UA into Haunt, you're going to pop Soul Harvest, and then tunnel all of your unstable afflictions into the boss and then drain like this, okay? So super easy. You're basically trying to get 100% UA uptime during your haunt windows, or at least dump as many shards as you can during your haunt windows, and then outside of your haunt windows, you're just draining, refreshing your dots, preparing for the next one. So you see my haunt is now coming off cooldown. I'm going to start refreshing my dots here just so they're full duration for the haunt. Precast that UA again for that contagion buff, cast the haunt, reap, and cast UAs. And now I have full freedom to move. All I need to worry about is casting UAs. You can, channel a drain when you can. Overall, it's pretty good, right? You see I'm baselining around a 900k right now. I think over fairly few iterations I tested with this build, I was ending around roughly 900k DPS in the long term, because once my Soul Harvest comes back off cooldown, my damage tends to ramp up quite a bit higher. But either way, you're always just looking to work around that haunt window. And it may seem like I'm a little bit shard starved here. I'm not really that shard starved. It really doesn't feel so bad. One of the major reasons is my belt isn't really proccing here, which is fine. But once we get that near tier bonus with the increased shard gen from corruption, we're definitely going to feel like we have more shards. Plus on multi-target, our shard gen is going to be out of this world, okay? So definitely look forward to Affliction single target. It's not going to be quite as strong as Demonology's, I think, but compared to Destro, I think we're still going to be ahead of Destro on single target, and any boss that has any sort of ad cleave will be ahead of Demo. So overall, looking quite nice in terms of single target. We'll wait till my Soul Harvest pops off here, and we'll go in on the boss with our last final burst. So we're just waiting here until our Soul Harvest comes, and you guys can see that I spike back up when that thing does come off cooldown. So in about 20 seconds, we'll be doing that. So Haunt is a very wavy DPS spec. You see I go up and down in bursts. So you'll see here when I pop my trinket here, we'll get ready for our Soul Harvest burst, let our trinket ramp up, and we're going to go in on the boss now. So cast the UA, cast this, and you guys will see my damage just kind of goes out of control now. I'll start ramping back up pretty heavily. So Haunt is quite a bursty spec. You go up and down depending on your Haunt waves, but overall I quite like it. I think it's going to be a very good single target talent. So you see I go back up to like 850k, and that's not even with very good RNG, right? So overall, I think Affliction is going to be pretty good on single target. It is slightly nerfed. I think you'll be expecting about 100k less than you do on live right now, which isn't honestly too bad, okay? Because our multi-target has been increased by quite a lot. So that's the generic single target build I think most people will be running. Now let's talk a little bit about the multi-target talent. So this is going to be, I think, the multi-target spec, Writhe and Agony, Absolute Corruption, Soul Harvest with Siphon Life. I think Phantom Singularity will also be pretty good for multi-target. Once Soul Harvest comes off cooldown, I'll show you guys that. But I also just want to show you guys the power of multi-dotting now and show you how much more damage Corruption and Siphon Life are doing. So overall, it's fairly simple. You're just going to be maintaining your dots on the boss and spreading out your unstable afflictions. So just like this on cleave fights. And all you need to do is just cast your dots like this. Just maintaining your agony stacks is going to lead you to do really good DPS on multi-target, and I'm just spreading out my UAs because I am using the belt. It just gives me more shards in the long term. So just by maintaining my dots, you see here, before my agonies even reach max stacks, I'm already over 1 million DPS, and if I was using Soul Harvest, it would go up even higher. The nice part about this is your damage isn't really reliant on your agony, not as much as it was before. Siphon Life and Corruption make up a much bigger part of your DPS now than they did before. So you can see here I'm easily maintaining 1.3 million without any cooldowns, just by maintaining my base dots, and I'll show you guys the damage breakdown in a second here. So if we're to look at my damage breakdown for just maintaining my dots and casting my UAs, you can see that Unstable Affliction and Agony are still quite far ahead, but Corruption and Siphon Life are actually not too far behind. They're still doing reasonable numbers. On multi-target, you can see Absolute Corruption is somewhat of a beast. It's almost matching my 15 stack Agonies. So overall, the damage baseline of these abilities relative to your UA and Agony have been brought up quite a bit, which is actually quite nice because it makes it feel like you get more value from multi-dotting, okay? And now I want to show you guys the power of Phantom Singularity. So this is an awesome talent to be running. I'm going to show you guys how much DPS you can pull out with this. So if I'm to start dotting here, get my dots out. And once you have your dots out, I'm going to cast a couple UAs here and then pop my Phantom Singularity, alright? I want you guys to check the numbers that you deal. So Phantom Singularity is just an owner talent now. It does so much more damage than it used to, and it's also on much less of a cooldown. So I think a lot of Warlocks are going to really enjoy this, having this, passive AoE dot that they can put on the boss and just crush the meters with it. It's going to be really, really fun to play with, and I'm really excited to use it on a lot of bosses, especially Botanist, Heroic. I think it's going to be quite a bit of fun to fuck around with that ability a little bit. So Just going to dot a little bit more here. You can see my damage is about the same as before, but I haven't had as much time to ramp my dots as I did previously, but my Phantom Singularity is almost off cooldown again. The cooldown again is so short, only at 40 seconds. So I'm going to pop it again here. Just keep casting these UAs forever, and my damage is going to keep going up and up and up. So it's great. So I'll show you guys the kind of damage it was doing here in a second. So when you're looking at my damage breakdown for this, you can see that Phantom Singularity is actually quite up there. It's almost doing as much as my Siphon Life, which is actually a lot of DPS. So, you know, each usage there was netting me around 4 million damage. So 4 million damage on a 40-second cooldown that you just press one global kind of fire and forget is actually really, really strong. And you can think it hits as many targets as are available. So that was just 3 target. If there was 4 targets, it would just do even more damage. It's an excellent AoE scaling ability. So really look forward to using this in like Mythic Plus, a lot of sort of different scenarios. It's going to be a lot of fun. So this is a multi-target build where we're going to be using it on cleave fights, such as the Desolate Host. I think this will probably be a really good spec to run on this boss fight. Okay. And finally for Mythic Plus. So I think the Mythic Plus build is actually staying pretty similar. I still think we're going to be running Contagion, Sow the Seeds, Soul Conduit. However, I think MG is going to kind of see a little bit of a move out of the meta. I think what we're actually going to be running is Haunt in Mythic Plus, because Haunt is actually quite strong in Mythic Plus, especially if you're able to get the resets, okay? So, Haunt in Mythic Plus. The main way you're going to be dealing Mythic Plus is in the same way as before. I'm not going to go too long into it, but obviously on AoE pulls, you're just going to be using that Seed of Corruption, like this, and getting that burst damage, maintaining your agonies and stuff. And you can actually use Haunt in the, just to boost the damage of your Seed of Corruptions on one of the bosses like this, right? So pretty cool. It has pretty nice synergy with this. And not only that, it also resets on the cooldown when something dies, so you can just be constantly spamming Haunt out on all of these mobs and getting huge damage increases depending on the trash pull, okay? So I think this will be the Mythic Plus spec. You could be resorting back to using Malefic Grasp, as it is still pretty strong, but I think Warlocks are still in a really solid place for Mythic Plus, especially with the damage buff to Corruption. It's going to be super good. If you have Sacrilash, look forward to that, okay? So I think this will be the standard Mythic Plus build. A couple things could change, but we will see. The last thing that I finally wanted to touch on before I finish up this video is Death's Embrace, okay? So I know I already talked about this. I know I already said this is going to make us very viable on a lot of fights and progression, but I just want you guys to kind of take it in a little bit more, okay? Imagine your DPS on a single target boss is around 800 or 900k baseline before the boss hits 35%, okay? So imagine you're middle of the pack before the boss reaches execute phase, which is probably where we're going to be. We're probably going to be about middle of the pack before the boss reaches this 35% threshold. Now, all of a sudden, the boss reaches 25% and you're guild less, and you're dealing 20 to 30% increased damage. You're just going to go out of this world. You're going to be dealing like well over, you know, the next DPS in this lust phase and towards the final ending of the boss, that it's just going to be such a huge talent. So when you think about it like that way, when you think about, okay, I'm going to be middle of the pack, but then all of a sudden, once the boss gets below 35%, I'm going to be the #1 DPS for the rest of the boss. This talent looks a lot more appealing, and it's actually going to be very strong. So I highly recommend a lot of you guys take this on progression, try it out on some bosses, see how it feels. I think it's going to be a really good talent. Anyways, my final opinion, I like what Blizzard has done. This is kind of like the TLDR. I like what Blizzard has done. They've upped the baseline on all of our abilities. They've lowered the damage modifiers of our tier 15 talents to make it so multi-dotting is a lot more powerful now for Affliction locks. Our single target is still going to be relatively mid to top tier. On boss fights where there's ads that we can get Wrath of Consumption, will definitely still be top tier. On boss fights that are just pure single target, we'll probably be middle of the pack or slightly ahead on average, but our execute DPS again is what's going to be getting us those spots for progression. So overall, I'm really happy with the changes. You guys let me know what you think. You guys have seen some pretty decent damage numbers here, so let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm going to be checking them out, and I will see you all later.